shift, the stakes are high. The mag breaks it down, no need to sigh. From EU rules to global news, Reg with Mag, your trusted views.
Hey everyone, welcome to Rag with Mag. We've got a regulatory news recap episode for you. 3 regulatory stories from around the globe, all directly relevant to medical device and digital health manufacturers. We're covering the FDA reclassifying skin cancer diagnostic devices, the TGA in Australia clarifying the rules around digital mental health software, and Swissmedic kicking off a 2026 post-market surveillance campaign that manufacturers in Switzerland need to know about. Lots to cover, let's get straight into it.
Kicking things off with the FDA. On March 25, 2026, the FDA issued a final order reclassifying 2 types of skin cancer diagnostic devices: optical diagnostic devices for melanoma detection and electrical impedance spectrometers. Both were moved from Class 3, that's the high-risk category, down to Class 2, moderate risk, and that is a meaningful regulatory shift that has real implications for manufacturers in this space.
For anyone who doesn't live and breathe FDA classifications every day, Class 3 meant these devices had to go through the pre-market approval pathway, the PMA. That is the most rigorous, most time-consuming, and most expensive regulatory pathway the FDA has. Extensive clinical evidence packages, long review timelines, significant ongoing compliance obligations, including PMA supplements every time you make a meaningful change, and annual reports to maintain. For smaller companies and startups, the PMA pathway has historically been a real barrier to entry.
Now, with Class 2, they move to the 510(k) pathway, shorter review timelines, lower evidence burden, and reduced ongoing compliance requirements. For manufacturers, this is genuinely good news. It lowers the barrier to commercializing these technologies, which the FDA explicitly says is intended to encourage innovation and improve patient access. More companies in the game means more competition and ultimately more options for patients and clinicians.
That said, the FDA has been very precise about how the new device type is defined. The official category is software-aided adjunctive diagnostic devices for use on skin lesions by physicians trained in the diagnosis and management of skin cancer. Every word matters. Adjunctive means these tools support physician decision-making. They are not standalone diagnostic tools, and they cannot be used to confirm a diagnosis on their own. They're designed to be used after a dermatologist has already identified a suspicious lesion. The clinician is always in the loop.
And these are prescription use only devices. There is no consumer pathway here. The FDA was explicit. The reclassification does not apply to mobile apps or tools intended for use by the general public. If you're developing a consumer-facing skin health application and thinking this reclassification opens a door for you, it doesn't.
On the special controls, even within 510(k), the FDA has set a genuinely high evidence bar. Clinical validation needs to demonstrate greater than 90% sensitivity for high-risk lesions. There's a requirement to show the device actually improves clinicians' diagnostic accuracy compared to unaided assessment. Diversity requirements are built in. Different skin phototypes, body sites, and patient risk factors need to be represented in clinical data. Human factors evaluation, software verification and validation, and typically a post-market surveillance study are all expected.
The big strategic question for manufacturers is around AI and machine learning, because most of these devices are software-driven at their core. Significant changes to the algorithm, especially AI or ML components, will still require a new 510(k) submission unless the manufacturer has a predetermined change control plan, a PCCP, in place. If AI is central to your device, building your PCCP strategy into your initial submission from day one is essential. The regulatory and product development strategies have to be developed together. It's also worth noting the significance of this reclassification for patient care more broadly. Skin cancer is one of the most common cancers globally, and melanoma in particular can be fatal if not detected early. These AI-powered diagnostic tools have genuine potential to improve early detection rates, but that potential has been partly locked behind a regulatory pathway that was too burdensome for many companies to navigate. Lowering that barrier without compromising safety standards is the right approach, and this reclassification is a good example of the FDA threading that needle.
The final order took effect April 24, 2026. This is already live. If you're a manufacturer working in this category, now is the time to revisit your regulatory pathway strategy in light of the reclassification.
All right, let's move over to Australia for story 2.
Our second story comes from the TGA, Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration. On March 16, 2026, they published guidance clarifying when software products that support mental health are excluded from medical device regulation, and for software developers and digital health companies operating in or looking to enter the Australian market, this guidance is genuinely significant.
The digital mental health space has historically sat in a regulatory gray area in Australia. Companies building CBT apps, mindfulness platforms, depression tracking tools, they've been asking for years, is this a medical device? Do I need to register on the ARTG, the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods? And the answer has often been ambiguous. This guidance is aimed at cleaning that up and giving the industry a clear self-assessment framework.
The exclusion sits under Item 14E of the Therapeutic Goods Excluded Goods Determination 2018. There are 4 conditions and you need to meet all 4. 1. The software must be intended to support users' mental health. 2. It must be based on established clinical practice guidelines. 3. Those guidelines must be clearly referenced within the software itself. And 4. Those guidelines must be accessible to users directly within the product interface. Meet all 4, and you don't need ARTG registration, which is a significant compliance relief.
Conditions 3 and 4 are where a lot of companies are going to trip up. Clearly referenced within the software means inside the product, not in a user manual, not on an external FAQ page, not buried in your terms and conditions. The TGA was unambiguous. Guidelines surfaced only through external documentation are insufficient. Users need to be able to access them directly inside the product interface. If your team hasn't thought about how guidelines are surfaced in product, that's a real compliance risk you need to address.
On what qualifies as an established clinical practice guideline, the TGA confirmed it doesn't have to come from a major national body. Guidelines from a hospital or a recognized individual expert can qualify, provided they're widely accepted in Australian clinical practice. But if your product is based on a proprietary treatment approach that hasn't been externally validated and recognized in established Australian guidelines, that's not covered, and you're looking at full ARTG registration.
One thing worth underlining, this isn't a one-time assessment. If you make significant changes to your product, add a new module, introduce a different clinical approach, you need to reevaluate whether the exclusion still applies. A product that qualified at launch may not qualify after a major update. Regulatory status follows the product as it evolves.
I also want to flag something that's easy to miss. The guidance addresses software that forms part of a novel treatment still undergoing clinical trials. If your digital mental health product is based on an innovative approach that's still in trials, even if it shows real promise, you're not qualifying for the exclusion. You may need to apply for a separate exemption. It's a really important distinction for companies that are at the cutting edge of digital therapeutics in the mental health space. For anyone distributing or planning to distribute a mental health application or website in Australia, run your product through the 4-question test. Be honest about whether your guidelines are actually surfaced in product. And if there are any doubts, get a proper regulatory assessment done before you go to market. The cost of an assessment is a fraction of the cost of non-compliance.
Great. Last story, over to Switzerland.
Swissmedic, the Swiss regulatory authority, has issued a formal information letter announcing a 2026 focus campaign to review post-market surveillance documentation for higher-risk medical devices on the Swiss market. If you have Class 2A, 2B, or Class 3 devices registered in Switzerland, this one is directly relevant to you.
Here's what's happening. Swissmedic's Division Medical Device Surveillance will conduct a focus review of PMS documentation for those class devices. They'll randomly select a sample of devices from the market. If yours is selected, the Swiss manufacturer or the Swiss authorized representative on record will be contacted by letter and asked to submit the relevant documentation for review.
What is Swissmedic looking at specifically? 3 things. First, a compliant post-market surveillance system under Article 56 of the Swiss Medical Devices Ordinance. Second, a documented PMS plan under Article 58. Third, up-to-date periodic safety reports, either a PMSR or an SSCP, depending on device class, generated in line with that plan under Articles 60 and 61. All three need to be current, complete, and audit-ready.
This is not Swissmedic's first campaign of this type. They ran a similar review in 2024, and the findings were concerning. Full compliance remained a challenge for many manufacturers. That's part of why they're doing it again. And Swissmedic has been clear. PMS obligations are non-negotiable, and further inspections can happen at any time entirely independent of any focus campaign. So even manufacturers not selected in this sample need their documentation in order.
Practically, no proactive response is required right now. If your device is selected, Swissmedic will contact you directly. But treat this announcement as a trigger to audit your documentation. Your PMS system needs to be actively generating real-world evidence, not just set up on paper during initial registration and left unchanged. Your PMS plan should be a living document. Your periodic safety reports need to be generated on schedule and reflect actual post-market data. Something the 2024 campaign findings really highlighted was that many manufacturers had PMS systems that existed on paper but weren't truly active. The systems were established during the initial registration process and then effectively left static. The post-market data wasn't being collected, analyzed, and fed back into the risk management and clinical evaluation cycle the Med-DO requires. A PMS system that exists on paper but isn't operationally active is not a compliant PMS system. That's the gap Swissmedic is looking to close.
And the Swiss authorized representative is a critical piece here. Your CH rep is the formal point of contact, the entity Swissmedic contacts, and who coordinates the response. If you don't have a CH rep in place, or your CH rep doesn't have clear visibility into your compliance status, that needs to be addressed now. When the letter arrives, you want to be prepared, not scrambling to assemble documentation under time pressure.
And that wraps up today's episode. 3 jurisdictions, 3 important stories. The FDA lowering the regulatory barrier for skin cancer diagnostic devices, the TGA drawing clear lines around digital mental health software exclusions in Australia, and Swissmedic putting manufacturers on notice that PMS compliance is under active scrutiny in Switzerland. A lot is moving in the regulatory world right now.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. If any of today's topics connect with your regulatory situation, whether it's a pathway question, a market access decision, or a compliance gap you've been meaning to close, reach out to the team at medenvoyglobal.com. They work across all of these markets and can help you translate regulatory signals like these into concrete, actionable steps.
Until next time, stay informed and stay compliant. Bye, guys.